Chapter 1. The Curious Matter of Mrs. Harrington. The winter of 1895 brought a biting chill that penetrated the very walls of our Baker Street lodgings. London lay shrouded beneath a thick blanket of fog, transforming familiar streets into ghostly passageways where gas lamps struggled against the darkness, their light diffused into hazy orbs suspended in the milky air. It had been 3 weeks since Holmes had applied his remarkable faculties to any case of significance. This inactivity had rendered my friend increasingly restless, his keen mind chafing at the tedium of everyday existence. I observed with concern his gradual descent into a listless melancholy that typically preceded his more dangerous moods. That morning, I found Holmes slouched in his armchair, surrounded by newspapers, his dressing gown hanging loosely from his gaunt frame, hair dishevelled from running his fingers through it in frustration. "Really, Watson," he remarked without looking up, "one might expect that in a metropolis of 5 million souls, someone might commit a crime worthy of intellectual consideration." "Perhaps honest citizens have turned over a new leaf," I suggested, settling into my chair. Holmes snorted. "A temporary anomaly. The human capacity for deviance remains constant. Only the expression varies." He tossed aside his newspaper and reached for his pipe. This continuing absence of stimulating cases is profoundly vexing. You might consider it a blessing that fewer people find themselves victims of criminal machinations. Your sentiment does you credit, though it offers little comfort to a mind in desperate need of exercise. We were interrupted by the doorbell, followed by hurried footsteps. Holmes straightened immediately, his expression brightening with anticipation. "Ah, perhaps this signals the end of our drought. A client, and one in considerable distress." The door opened, and Mrs. Hudson appeared. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes. He's in quite a state." A man pushed past her, approximately 40, impeccably dressed in a manner that spoke of wealth, though his appearance was marred by obvious distress. His complexion was ashen, eyes wide with what appeared to be terror, beads of perspiration on his brow despite the chill. "Mr. Holmes," he gasped. "I am he," my friend replied, rising smoothly. "Pray, compose yourself. This is my colleague and trusted friend, Dr. Watson, who assists me in my investigations." Our visitor collapsed into the chair Holmes indicated. "Forgive my manner. I am Richard Harrington of Belgrave Square. I have come on a matter of the utmost urgency. Indeed, I fear for my very sanity." Holmes steepled his fingers beneath his chin. "Begin at the beginning, Mr. Harrington, and omit nothing. It concerns my wife, Mr. Holmes. She has vanished under circumstances that defy all rational explanation. Missing persons are unfortunately common enough. What aspects of your wife's disappearance do you find particularly inexplicable?" "She vanished, sir, while sitting for her portrait," Harrington exclaimed. "One moment she was there before the artist, and the next gone. Yet her image remained captured in the painting, with an expression of such terror that it chills my blood." I exchanged a glance with Holmes, whose eyes had narrowed slightly. "Perhaps you could elaborate on the precise sequence of events," Holmes suggested. "My wife, Elizabeth, had commissioned a portrait from Anton Verlaine, a French artist now residing in London. Yesterday was the final sitting. I accompanied her to his Chelsea studio, but remained in the antechamber, as Verlaine preferred working without observers. After approximately an hour, I heard a strange cry, not quite a scream, but a sound of alarm. Harrington paused, struggling to maintain composure. I rushed into the studio immediately. Verlaine stood before his canvas, paintbrush still in hand, utterly bewildered. Elizabeth's chair was empty, yet on the canvas was her likeness, perfect in every detail, but with an expression of horror unlike anything I've ever witnessed. And the artist's explanation? Holmes inquired. He had none. He claimed that one moment she was there, sitting perfectly still, and the next she had vanished. He insisted he had turned away only briefly to mix pigment. Harrington's hands trembled. I thought him mad, or worse, that he had harmed Elizabeth. I summoned the police immediately. Inspector Lestrade conducted a thorough search, but found no trace of my wife, nor any evidence of foul play. The doors and windows were all secured from within, and the only other exit, a small service door, was bolted and unused for years, judging by the dust. Harrington leaned forward. Lestrade suggested Elizabeth might have left of her own accord, while I was momentarily distracted, but she would never abandon me without explanation. Moreover, I was alert throughout. No one entered or exited through the antechamber. It was as if she had dissolved into the canvas. Holmes rose and began to pace. This painting, where is it now? At Verlaine's studio. The police examined it, but found nothing unusual beyond the disturbing expression. And your wife's personal effects? All were found precisely where she had placed them before the sitting. Holmes turned sharply. Mr. Harrington, I shall take your case. It presents several features of singular interest. Relief flooded Harrington's features. Thank God. The police treat me as though I were delusional. I reserve judgment until I have examined all evidence, Holmes replied. Watson and I shall accompany you to Verlaine's studio immediately. The artist is still available. Yes, Lestrade instructed him not to leave London. Excellent. Holmes emerged from his bedroom moments later in a well-tailored suit. Watson, are you armed? I patted my coat pocket. Always, when accompanying you. Then let us not delay. The game is afoot. As we followed our client into the swirling fog, I noticed the transformation in my friend's demeanor. His lethargy had vanished entirely, replaced by the alert, energetic Holmes I knew so well. What do you make of it? I inquired as we climbed into a hansom cab. It would be premature to theorize without data, he replied, though I detected excitement in his voice. But consider this. Either we are dealing with an elaborate hoax, a criminal abduction executed with extraordinary skill, or something altogether more unusual. I suspect this may prove to be one of the most singular problems ever to challenge our abilities. As our cab rattled through fog-shrouded streets toward Chelsea, I suppressed a shiver of apprehension, little suspecting the bizarre sequence of events that would unfold as we pursued the case of the woman who had, to all appearances, vanished inside a frame. Chapter 2. The artist's studio, Verlaine's studio, occupied the upper floor of a narrow building on a quiet Chelsea street. The structure, though modest in appearance, possessed the large windows so coveted by artists for their northern light. As our cab pulled to a halt, I noted the curious absence of passers-by. The fog had evidently discouraged even the most determined of London's pedestrians. The police constable stationed outside has departed, Harrington observed anxiously as We approached the entrance. Lestrade assured me the premises would remain under observation. Perhaps recalled to other duties, Holmes remarked, examining the door with keen interest. No signs of forced entry, though someone has recently applied oil to these hinges. He ran a finger along the metal, rubbing the residue between his fingertips. Within the last 24 hours, I should say. The door opened to Harrington's, key revealing a narrow staircase. Holmes paused at the bottom step, producing his lens to study the worn treads. "Interesting," he murmured. "Many visitors ascend these stairs, yet the wear pattern suggests most are of similar weight and gait, models, I presume. Verlaine is quite fashionable among certain social circles," Harrington confirmed. "My wife heard of him through Lady Carmichael, whose portrait was much admired last season." The studio itself was a large open space, dominated by tall windows that admitted weak grey light. Canvases in various states of completion leaned against the walls, while the scent of linseed oil and turpentine hung heavy in the air. A Persian carpet of faded grandeur covered the central floor, upon which sat an ornate chair. Clearly, the spot where Elizabeth Harrington had posed, the artist himself stood before an easel, his slender frame draped in a paint-stained smock. He turned at our entrance, revealing a face that belied expectations. Not the bohemian I had anticipated, but a man of perhaps 50, with meticulously trimmed beard and intelligent eyes that regarded us warily. "Monsieur Verlaine," Harrington said stiffly, "this is Mr. Sherlock Holmes and his associate, Dr. Watson. They are investigating my wife's disappearance." "The famous detective?" Verlaine's accent was present but refined. "I have cooperated fully with Inspector Lestrade. I can add nothing to my statement." Holmes ignored this, moving immediately to the portrait that stood on the easel. I joined him, and could not suppress a gasp at what I beheld. The painting was undeniably masterful. Elizabeth Harrington appeared almost lifelike upon the canvas, her auburn hair and ivory complexion rendered with exquisite skill. Yet her expression chilled me to the core. It was not merely fear, but absolute terror that contorted her delicate features, her eyes wide with an almost primal horror, as though bearing witness to something beyond human comprehension. "Remarkable work, Monsieur Verlaine," Holmes commented, studying the canvas through his lens. "You have captured what appears to be a moment of extreme emotional distress with extraordinary precision." "I painted what I saw," Verlaine replied defensively. "In the final moments her expression changed. I merely recorded it." "Before she vanished," Holmes added, glancing sharply at the artist. "Yes, precisely so. One moment she sat there." He gestured to the chair, and the next she was gone. I turned only briefly to mix a particular shade of vermilion. When I looked back, he spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. Holmes circled the room methodically, examining every corner. He knelt by the chair, ran his fingers along the windowsills, and inspected the floorboards with his lens. Finally, he approached a door at the rear of the studio, the service entrance Mr. Harrington mentioned. "It has not been used in years," Verlaine confirmed. "It leads to a back staircase that has become quite unsafe." Holmes examined the door carefully, paying particular attention to the heavy bolt that secured it. A layer of undisturbed dust confirmed Verlaine's assertion. "Tell me, monsieur," Holmes said, turning abruptly. Have you experienced anything unusual in this studio before yesterday's incident? Cold spots, unexplained noises, objects moving without apparent cause? Verlaine's expression flickered with surprise. You cannot believe this is some supernatural occurrence, Mr. Holmes. I believe in observation, not speculation. Please answer the question. The artist hesitated. There have been moments, a sensation of being watched. Several models have commented on feeling uncomfortable while posing, particularly in that chair. He nodded toward the ornate seat. One refused to return after her first sitting. Holmes turned to Harrington. Your wife mentioned no discomfort during her previous sessions. None whatsoever. Elizabeth was pragmatic to a fault, Mr. Holmes. She would have dismissed such notions as fanciful. And yet, Holmes mused, something caused that expression of terror. He returned to the painting, studying it with renewed intensity. The technical aspects interest me, Monsieur Verlaine. This appears nearly complete. Yet you mentioned yesterday was the final sitting? Merely for refinements. The fundamental work was accomplished in previous sessions. I see. And did you work on the painting after Mrs. Harrington's disappearance? Certainly not. Verlaine appeared genuinely offended. I have not touched it since that moment. Holmes nodded, seemingly satisfied. Mr. Harrington, with your permission, I should like to remove this painting to Baker Street for further examination. Of course, anything that might help find Elizabeth. Du must protest, Verlaine interjected. That painting is evidence in a potential crime. Holmes interrupted coldly. Your artistic concerns are secondary to Mrs. Harrington's welfare. While this exchange occurred, I had been examining the room's perimeter and noticed something peculiar on the floor beneath one of the larger canvases leaning against the wall. I bent down and picked up a small object. Holmes, I called. You might want to see this. My friend joined me, taking the item I had discovered, a small silver button engraved with an intricate monogram, AM. Not belonging to Mrs. Harrington, I presume? Holmes asked, showing it to our client. Harrington shook his head. Elizabeth's garments bore no such adornment yesterday. Nor does it match any of my own effects, Verlaine added, examining the button with evident puzzlement. Holmes pocketed the button with a thoughtful expression. We shall take the painting now. Monsieur Verlaine, I advise you to remain available for further questioning. As we carefully wrapped the canvas and prepared to depart, Holmes drew me aside. Watson, he murmured, observe Verlaine's hands. I glanced discreetly at the artist. Steady, no signs of nervousness. Clean beneath the nails, despite his profession. Precisely, Holmes replied, most illuminating. The significance of this observation would only become clear later, as we unraveled the extraordinary case of the woman who vanished inside a frame. Chapter 3. Curious Revelations. Back at Baker Street, Holmes immediately cleared the dining table to make space for the painting. Mrs. Hudson, accustomed to my friend's eccentricities, merely sighed when she saw the state of our quarters, but brightened considerably when Harrington graciously requested tea and refreshments. I must return home, our client said anxiously after the tea arrived. Elizabeth's sister is arriving from Bath this afternoon. I've telegraphed her about the situation. By all means, Holmes replied, already absorbed in his examination of The portrait. Watson and I shall conduct our initial analysis. I may require further information about your wife's habits and associations tomorrow." Once Harrington departed, Holmes's demeanour changed subtly. He straightened, his movements becoming more precise as he positioned the painting in the best available light. "What do you make of our artist, Watson?" he asked, fetching his chemical apparatus from a cabinet. "Composed, perhaps excessively so, under the circumstances," I replied, "either innocent and genuinely bewildered, or possessing remarkable self-control. Indeed, and the painting itself." I studied the haunting image once more. "The technical skill is undeniable, but that expression—" I suppressed a shudder. "It seems almost incongruous with the rest of the portrait, as though the face were painted by a different hand, or at a different time." Holmes nodded approvingly. "Excellent observation. The brushwork on the face does differ subtly from the remainder of the canvas. Observe these strokes." He pointed with a slender finger. "Compared to these, different pressure, slightly different technique." He produced a small knife and carefully scraped minute samples from different areas of the painting onto glass slides, adding various reagents and studying the results under his microscope. "Most illuminating," he murmured after several minutes of silent work. "The pigments used for the face contain a substance I cannot immediately identify." From his waistcoat pocket, Holmes withdrew the silver button we had discovered in Verlaine's studio and examined it under his lens. "AM," I mused. "Who might that be? That, my dear Watson, is a question of considerable significance. Observe the craftsmanship. This is not merely decorative, but a functional piece from a bespoke garment. The silver is high quality, suggesting a person of means." A knock at our door interrupted further speculation. Holmes called for our visitor to enter, and I was surprised to see Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard appear. His expression characteristically pinched with irritation. "I might have known you'd involve yourself in this business, Mr. Holmes," he said, removing his hat. "Mr. Harrington mentioned you'd taken the painting." "Ah, Lestrade, your timing is fortuitous. Perhaps you can enlighten us regarding your investigation thus far." The inspector sniffed. "Not much to tell. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. The lady's valuables, jewellery, handbag, and so forth were all present. No secret passages or hidden compartments in the studio, despite my thorough search." "And your conclusion?" Holmes prompted. "The obvious one. She left voluntarily while her husband was distracted. Perhaps an assignation. These society marriages often harbour secrets." Holmes tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the table. "Did you interview Verlaine's neighbours, other occupants of the building?" "The ground floor houses a bookbinder who was away yesterday. The adjacent buildings reported nothing unusual, though visibility was poor due to the fog." "And Verlaine himself? What did your instincts tell you?" Lestrade hesitated. He seemed genuinely confused by the whole affair. No history of trouble, well regarded in artistic circles. Several prominent clients vouched for his character. "Including Lady Carmichael, I understand," Holmes remarked. "Yes, she was most emphatic about his respectability." Lestrade glanced at the portrait. "Though I confess, that painting gave me a turn. Unnatural, that expression." Holmes suddenly straightened. "Lady Carmichael, I recall the name. Was there not some scandal involving her husband recently, Sir William? He suffered financial reversals, investments in South African ventures that collapsed. Nothing criminal, merely unfortunate. I see. Holmes fell silent, his expression distant as he assembled some private train of thought. "Inspector," I ventured, producing the silver button. "We found this in Verlaine's studio. The monogram AM. Does it suggest anything to you?" Lestrade examined it briefly. "Can't say it does. Not connected to any current investigation, at any rate." Holmes abruptly crossed to his desk and began rifling through a stack of newspapers. "Ah, here we are," he announced triumphantly, brandishing a society page from several weeks prior. Lady Carmichael's annual winter ball. Among the notable attendees, he ran his finger down the column, was one Alastair Montague, recently returned from Vienna. Lestrade's expression remained blank. "The name means nothing to me, nor to me, which is precisely what makes it interesting," Holmes replied. "Watson, I believe we should pay a visit to Lady Carmichael tomorrow. Lestrade, might I suggest you inquire discreetly about this Montague fellow?" After the inspector departed, Holmes returned to the painting with renewed intensity. He held his lens close to the bottom right corner and suddenly emitted a soft exclamation. "Watson, observe this." He indicated a nearly imperceptible marking beneath Verlaine's signature. Under magnification, I could just discern what appeared to be tiny numerals, 731. A second signature, a code of some kind, I suggested. Perhaps. Holmes straightened, his eyes bright with the thrill of the chase. "The game grows more interesting. I require silence now. I must think." He retreated to his chair, folded his hands beneath his chin, and entered that trance-like state of concentration I knew so well. I settled with my journal to record the day's events, occasionally glancing at the portrait of Elizabeth Harrington, whose terrified eyes seemed to follow me around the room, silently pleading for rescue from whatever horror had befallen her. Little did I suspect that before another day had passed, we would witness a second inexplicable disappearance, one that would cast our investigation in an entirely new and sinister light. Chapter 4. Lady Carmichael's Revelation. Morning brought no fresh insights, though Holmes had clearly spent much of the night in contemplation. I found him at breakfast, surrounded by reference volumes on art history and chemistry, the painting, now positioned near the window where dawn light illuminated its troubling details. "Ah, Watson," he greeted me. "I've sent word to Lady Carmichael requesting an audience this morning. Her reply arrived moments ago. She will receive us at 11. "You developed any theories?" I inquired, helping myself to coffee. "Several, each more improbable than the last." Holmes tapped the mysterious numerals we had discovered. These digits, 7231, could represent a date, a location, or a cipher. The arrangement suggests significance beyond mere chance. Our hansom deposited us before an elegant Mayfair residence shortly before 11. Lady Carmichael received us in a drawing-room that spoke of faded opulence, fine furnishings showing subtle signs of wear, valuable ornaments conspicuously absent from vacant, spaces on mantels and side tables. The financial reversals Lestrade had mentioned were evidently taking their toll. Our hostess was a striking woman of perhaps 40, whose patrician features retained considerable beauty despite the strain evident in the tightness around her eyes. She greeted us with practiced cordiality, though I detected wariness beneath her polished veneer. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, how may I be of assistance? Your note mentioned Elizabeth Harrington's unfortunate situation." "Indeed," Holmes replied, accepting the offered seat. "I understand you recommended Monsieur Verlaine's services to Mrs. Harrington." "I did. Anton is remarkably talented. My own portrait was most favourably received last season. Might we view it?" Holmes inquired with calculated casualness. A flicker of something, discomfort perhaps, crossed Lady Carmichael's features. "I fear that's impossible. The painting was sold when Sir William's investments proved disappointing. A pity. May I ask who purchased it?" "A private collector. I'm not at liberty to disclose their identity." Her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Now, regarding Elizabeth, did you observe anything unusual during your sittings with Verlaine?" Holmes interjected. "Any peculiar methods or materials?" Lady Carmichael hesitated. "He is somewhat unconventional. He insisted on complete privacy during certain stages of the work. Something about preserving the purity of his creative process." "And during these private sessions, did you ever experience any discomfort or unusual sensations?" Her composure faltered momentarily. "Mr. Holmes, what exactly are you implying?" "I merely gather information, Lady Carmichael." "Might I inquire about your acquaintance with Alastair Montague?" The effect was immediate. Her face paled visibly. "How does Mr. Montague relate to Elizabeth's disappearance?" "That remains unclear. I note, however, that your reaction suggests significance." Lady Carmichael rose abruptly and crossed to the window, her back to us as she gathered herself. When she turned, her expression had hardened with resolve. "Mr. Holmes, there are matters one hesitates to discuss, even in the interest of justice. However," she drew a deep breath, "Alastair Montague is not merely a social acquaintance. He and Anton Verlaine share a connection that extends beyond artistic circles." "What sort of connection?" Holmes pressed. "They both belong to a private society, the Hermetic Order of the Veiled Canvas. Their activities are shrouded in secrecy, though rumours suggest experiments combining art with esoteric practices." "Occultism," I blurted, unable to contain my surprise. "Not precisely, Doctor. They reject such labels, claiming their work represents scientific advancement beyond conventional understanding. Sir William briefly participated in their gatherings before withdrawing. He refused to discuss what transpired, but he was changed afterward, more withdrawn, troubled by nightmares." Holmes leaned forward intently. "And Elizabeth Harrington, was she connected to this order?" "Not to my knowledge. I recommended Verlaine purely for his artistic talent." She hesitated, "Though I wonder now if I made a terrible mistake." "The order meets at a specific location, Odeur, property owned by Montague in Blackheath, number 731 Ravenswood Road." Holmes and I exchanged glances at the familiar sequence. "Lady Carmichael," Holmes said carefully, "have any other individuals associated with this order experienced unusual circumstances? Disappearances, perhaps?" Her hands trembled slightly. "There was one incident. A young model named Clara Winters vanished after sitting for Verlaine last autumn. The authorities concluded she had simply relocated without notice. But you harbored doubts," Holmes finished. She left all her possessions behind, and afterward Verlaine exhibited a landscape containing a small female figure that bore a striking resemblance to Clara. The exhibition caused something of a sensation. Critics claimed they could see the figure move when observed from different angles. As we departed shortly thereafter, Holmes was uncharacteristically silent until we were safely in our cab. "Cheersuffin, Ravenswood Road," he finally remarked. "Our numeric clue represents an address, not a code." "You suspect this order is somehow responsible for Elizabeth Harrington's disappearance?" "I suspect a connection, though its nature remains obscure. The mention of Clara Winters introduces a pattern that cannot be ignored." Holmes tapped his cane thoughtfully against the floor of the cab. "Watson, I believe we must make 2 stops before returning to Baker Street. First to Scotland Yard to consult with Lestrade regarding this previous disappearance. Then to Richard Harrington's residence. I'm curious whether his wife had any interest in esoteric matters, despite Lady Carmichael's belief to the contrary. And the order itself? Shall we investigate their Blackheath property? All in good time. We must proceed with caution. These are evidently people of influence and means." Holmes glanced out the window. "Curious, is it not, how art and science so often converge at the boundaries of the unexplained? The Order of the Veiled Canvas, a most suggestive name given our current mystery. As our cab rattled toward Scotland Yard, I found myself contemplating the portrait of Elizabeth Harrington, her terrified gaze now assuming new and disturbing significance. What had she witnessed in her final moments before the canvas claimed her? Chapter 5. Threads Converging. Inspector Lestrade received us in his cluttered office at Scotland Yard, where the perpetual odour of stale tobacco mingled with the scent of damp woolen uniforms. Outside, the weather had turned, and rain lashed against the windows with determined fury. Clara Winters. Lestrade rifled through a cabinet of files. "Yes, I recall the case. Disappeared in October last. A life model for several artists in Chelsea." He extracted a thin folder. "Nothing suspicious. Discovered. Her landlady reported she'd mentioned wanting to start fresh elsewhere." "Was Verlaine questioned?" Holmes inquired, scanning the meagre documentation. "Briefly. He'd employed her twice for preliminary studies. No evidence linked him to her disappearance." Lestrade frowned. "You're not suggesting a connection to the Harrington case?" "I suggest nothing yet. Merely gather facts." Holmes copied several details from the file into his notebook. "The investigating officer, Constable Phillips, did he search Verlaine's studio thoroughly?" "Standard procedure," Lestrade replied defensively. "Though I wasn't personally involved. And this exhibition Lady Carmichael mentioned, the landscape featuring a figure resembling Miss Winters?" Lestrade shrugged. "Art exhibitions aren't police matters, Mr. Holmes." "Perhaps they should be, in this instance." Holmes closed his notebook with a snap. "One final query. Are you familiar with an organization called the Hermetic Order of the Veiled Canvas?" The inspector's expression remained blank. "Never heard of it. Some sort of artist society?" "Of a sort," Holmes replied enigmatically. "I'd appreciate any information your sources might discreetly provide about activities at 731 Ravenswood Road in Blackheath." Our next stop brought us to the Harrington residence in Belgrave Square. The house was imposing yet welcoming, its interior reflecting refined taste rather than ostentatious display. Harrington greeted us in a study lined with bookshelves, his initial hope at our arrival giving way to disappointment when he realized we brought no news of his wife. "I've been reviewing Elizabeth's correspondence," he said, gesturing to letters arranged on his desk. "Nothing suggests any reason for voluntary departure. Her sister Agnes confirms she expressed no unhappiness or unusual concerns during their recent exchanges." Mrs. Harrington's interests, Holmes began carefully. Did they extend to philosophical or spiritual matters? Theosophy, perhaps, or esoteric studies? Harrington appeared startled. Not at all. Elizabeth viewed such things with practical skepticism. She once described spiritualism as elaborate theatre for the credulous. He hesitated. "Why do you ask?" "All avenues must be explored," Holmes replied. "Might I examine her personal items? Books, journals, correspondence?" Harrington led us to a small private sitting room that clearly belonged to his wife. Holmes moved methodically through the space, examining objects with casual precision that belied his intense focus. A writing desk yielded little until Holmes discovered a tucked-away drawer containing a single calling card bearing the name Alastair Montague with an address in Mayfair. "Do you recognize this name?" Holmes asked, showing the card to Harrington. "Vaguely. A collector, I believe, who attended an exhibition where Elizabeth purchased a small watercolour last month." Harrington frowned. "Is it significant?" "Possibly." Holmes pocketed the card. "One final question. Did your wife mention another woman named Clara Winters, perhaps in connection with Verlaine?" "Not that I recall." Harrington's expression grew pained. "Mr. Holmes, these questions suggest directions I find troubling. Do you believe Elizabeth's disappearance involves unnatural elements? I believe in evidence, Mr. Harrington. Currently, that evidence points to human agency, however bizarre the circumstances may appear. As we departed, the rain had intensified. We hurried into a cab, both of us drenched despite the brief exposure. A visit to Mr. Montague's Mayfair residence appears warranted, I suggested as we settled in. Indeed, though I suspect we'll find him absent. Holmes extracted Montague's card, comparing the Mayfair address with his notes. Our investigations converge increasingly on the Blackheath property. You believe this order is conducting some form of experiments? Using art as a means of... what? Abduction? Speculation without sufficient data is dangerous, Watson. However, the pattern emerges with growing clarity. 2 women connected to Verlaine, both vanished, both appearing subsequently in his paintings under unusual circumstances. But to what purpose? Therein lies our central question. Holmes gazed thoughtfully at the rain-streaked window. Consider the transformation of raw materials into art. Pigments, oils, canvas combined through technique to create something that transcends its components. What if certain practitioners sought to reverse this process? Reverse it? I don't follow. The conversion of life into art is Verlaine's stated profession. But what if the order seeks to extract essence from art, to manifest the artistic creation into reality? I stared at him. That borders on alchemy, Holmes. Surely you don't suggest... I suggest nothing supernatural, Watson. Advanced science often appears as magic to the uninitiated. The order may employ techniques unknown to conventional science, but principles that remain within natural law, however obscure, Upon reaching Baker Street, we found Mrs. Hudson in considerable agitation. "Thank heavens you've returned. The most extraordinary thing—" She wrung her hands. "The painting, Mr. Holmes, it's changed!" We rushed upstairs to find the portrait of Elizabeth Harrington transformed. The woman's expression, previously frozen in terror, had altered subtly. Her eyes, once wide with fear, now held a different quality. Desperation mingled with determination. More disturbing still, her position had shifted slightly, her hand now raised as if pressing against an invisible barrier. "Good God!" I whispered. "How is this possible?" Holmes examined the painting with his lens, his expression grave. "The pigments remain wet in certain areas. This painting is somehow active." "Active? Holmes, surely you can't mean— I mean, Watson, that Elizabeth Harrington may not be entirely lost. And if I'm correct, time is of the essence. We must visit Blackheath tonight." Chapter 6. The Order of the Veiled Canvas Dusk had settled over London when Holmes and I departed Baker Street, the portrait carefully wrapped and secured in a leather portfolio. Holmes had insisted on bringing it, despite my concerns about exposing it to the elements. "It is our most direct connection to Mrs. Harrington," he explained, "and potentially our means of rescuing her." The journey to Blackheath proved arduous. Rain continued unabated, transforming roads into mired channels that slowed our progress considerably. Our driver, generously compensated in advance, muttered continuous complaints but persevered through the deluge. "I've sent word to Lestrade," Holmes informed me, as our cab lurched through the darkness, though I requested he delay any official intervention until morning. "You prefer to investigate without police involvement?" "I prefer to observe the Order's activities without the disruptive influence of Scotland Yard's finest." Holmes checked his revolver before returning it to his pocket. "We may witness phenomena that conventional law enforcement would find challenging to comprehend. Ravenswood Road proved to be a secluded lane lined with substantial properties separated by extensive grounds. Number 731 stood apart from its neighbours, partially concealed behind a high stone wall crowned with decorative ironwork. The house, beyond, visible only in glimpses through the ornate gates, appeared to be a Georgian manor, its windows illuminated with a peculiar bluish light. "Several carriages present," Holmes observed, studying the driveway. "The Order convenes tonight, it seems. How do you propose we gain entry?" I whispered, noting the formidable gates and the shadowy figure of what appeared to be a guard sheltering in a small porter's lodge. "Through legitimate means, for the moment." Holmes straightened his collar and approached the gate with confident strides. To my astonishment, his knock at the lodge door was answered promptly, and upon showing something to the guard, I later learned it was Montague's calling card. We were admitted with deferential nods. The Order values discretion, but welcomes those who come properly introduced, Holmes murmured as we proceeded up the gravel drive. "Montague's card serves as temporary credentials." The main door stood partially open, revealing a brightly lit entrance hall, where a young man in formal attire received cloaks and hats from arriving guests. Holmes handed him our wet outer garments, along with a folded banknote, keeping the portfolio containing the painting close at his side. "The demonstration has already begun, gentlemen," the attendant informed us, "in the central gallery." We followed the sound of hushed voices to a large chamber at the heart of the house. What had likely once been a ballroom had been transformed into a gallery space, its walls adorned with paintings of various sizes and subjects. Perhaps 30 individuals, predominantly men, though several women were present, stood in a semicircle facing a raised platform at the room's far end. Upon this platform stood Alastair Montague himself, a tall, aristocratic figure with silver-streaked, dark hair and features that suggested both intelligence and cruelty in equal measure. Beside him, to my shock, was Anton Verlaine, attending to an easel that held a canvas covered with a black velvet cloth. Final demonstration of our new technique, Montague was saying as we quietly positioned ourselves at the gathering's periphery. After years of research and countless failed attempts, we have finally perfected the process of extractive manifestation. Miçdu, Dulce, of anticipation rippled through the assembled guests. As you know, conventional art merely represents reality, a pale imitation of true form. Our process reverses this limitation. Montague gestured grandly. We no longer merely capture essence. In pigment, we extract it, preserve it, and can now manifest it at will. Verlaine removed the velvet covering to reveal a painting of a pastoral scene, featuring a young woman in a white dress seated by a stream. Even from our position, I recognized the technical brilliance of the execution, though something about the woman's expression struck me as oddly vacant. Observe, Montague continued, how the subject appears dormant, waiting. This, friends, is the preserved essence of Miss Clara Winters, captured last October. A chill ran through me at this casual confirmation of their involvement in the models and a disappearance. Montague turned to Verlaine, who had begun mixing something in a small silver bowl. The catalyst, if you please. The artist approached the painting with the bowl and a fine brush. With meticulous precision, he applied a clear substance to specific points on the canvas, the figure's eyes, lips, and hands. The formula remains our closely guarded secret, Montague explained to the rapt audience. Derived from ancient alchemical principles yet refined through modern chemical understanding. As Verlaine completed his application, the painting began to emit a subtle luminescence. To my astonishment and horror, the depicted scene appeared to deepen, as though the flat surface receded into genuine three-dimensional space. More disturbing still, the young woman's figure stirred slightly, her previously vacant eyes blinking with apparent consciousness. The threshold between art and reality has been breached, Montague announced triumphantly. Watch now as we complete the manifestation. Holmes clutched my arm with unusual intensity. Watson, he whispered urgently, we must intervene. They're extracting her. Before I could respond, Montague had begun an incantation in what sounded like Latin or Greek, while Verlaine made precise gestures toward the painting, using a silver instrument resembling a conductor's baton. The luminescence intensified dramatically, causing several guests to shield their eyes. And then, impossibly, a pale hand emerged from the canvas, a living human hand, stretching outward as though reaching desperately for salvation. Good God, I breathed, scarcely believing my eyes. Holmes was already moving forward, the portfolio containing Elizabeth Harrington's portrait clutched tightly under his arm. Whatever he intended remained unknown, For at that moment the doors to the gallery burst open with a tremendous crash. "Nobody move! Police!" came Inspector Lestrade's unmistakable voice, followed by the thunder of multiple pairs of boots on the marble floor. Chaos erupted instantly. The manifestation halted abruptly as Verlaine dropped his instruments in shock. The outstretched hand withdrew into the painting like water absorbed by sand, and the luminescence died away. "Holmes!" I called, losing sight of my friend in the panicked crowd. I caught only a glimpse of Montague seizing the partially animated painting and rushing toward a concealed door behind the platform, before the surging mass of fleeing Order members separated us completely. Chapter 7. The Pursuit. Watson! Holmes's voice cut through the chaos. I glimpsed him forcing his way against the tide of fleeing Order members, still clutching the portfolio. "The concealed door! Quickly!" I shouldered my way towards the platform, narrowly avoiding collision with Lestrade, who was attempting to maintain some semblance of order as his constables corralled the panicked guests. "Holmes, what the devil?" the inspector began. "No time, Lestrade," Holmes called back. "Secure Verlaine. Don't let him destroy anything." The artist had indeed remained behind, frantically gathering papers and vials from a side table. At Holmes's shout, 2 constables seized him by the arms. Holmes and I reached the hidden door through which Montague had vanished, a panel cleverly designed to blend with the ornate wainscoting. Beyond lay a narrow corridor, illuminated by gas lamps that cast eerie, elongated shadows along the walls. "He can't have gone far," Holmes muttered, his keen eyes scanning the floor. "Water droplets. He's carrying the still wet painting." We moved swiftly down the passage, which descended via a spiral staircase into what appeared to be the house's extensive cellars. The air grew increasingly cold and damp, with a peculiar acrid undertone that irritated the throat. "Chemical preservatives," Holmes observed, pausing briefly to examine residue on a shelf lined with stoppered bottles, combined with more traditional substances. Rare botanical extracts, if I'm not mistaken. "Holmes, if Montague escapes with the painting, then Clara Winters remains imprisoned, and we lose critical evidence regarding Mrs. Harrington's fate." Holmes resumed our pursuit with increased urgency. More concerning still is what Montague might accomplish with the catalyst formula Verlaine was applying. The cellar opened into a larger chamber that clearly served as a laboratory. Equipment of both scientific and esoteric nature-cluttered workbenches, modern chemical apparatus, alongside items that would not have looked out of place in a medieval alchemist's workshop. Several easels stood empty, their canvases apparently removed in haste. "We've missed him," I said, noting a door at the far end standing slightly ajar. "Perhaps." Holmes approached one of the workbenches, examining an open journal filled with diagrams and dense notations. "Fascinating. Their technique appears to involve a combination of chemical compounds and precise mathematical formulations, a sort of geometric harmonic that, when applied correctly, alters the fundamental properties of the painted surface. Holmes, surely you don't accept these supernatural claims? Nothing supernatural about it, Watson. Merely science we don't yet comprehend." "Ah." He suddenly straightened, holding up a small glass vial containing a clear liquid. "The catalyst Verlaine was applying. We shall need this." A crash from beyond the open door galvanized us back into motion. We emerged into what appeared to be a tunnel leading away from the house, dimly lit by widely spaced gas lamps. In the distance, a figure was visible. Montague, struggling with the awkward burden of the painting. "Montague!" Holmes called, his voice echoing against the stone walls. "It's finished. The police have Verlaine and your formula!" The man turned, his face contorted with fury and desperation. "You understand nothing, Mr. Holmes, nothing of what we've achieved." "I understand. You've imprisoned at least 2 women through your achievements," Holmes replied, advancing steadily. "Release them, and perhaps leniency might be possible." Montague laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Release them? They are the achievement. Perfect preservation of beauty, of essence, captured eternally in moments of supreme emotional intensity." He brandished the painting of Clara Winters. "This represents merely our first success. Mrs. Harrington is our masterpiece. Fear in its purest form, extracted and preserved. Yet not entirely contained," Holmes countered. "The portrait changes. She fights your process." Uncertainty flickered across Montague's features. "Impossible. Once fully integrated into the canvas matrix, the subject cannot what? Maintain consciousness, exercise will." Holmes inched closer. "Your hubris blinds you to the limitations of your technique." I had been gradually circling to the side during this exchange, seeking an opportunity to flank Montague. As Holmes kept him engaged, I positioned myself near a side passage that would allow me to cut off his retreat. "The integration requires emotional intensity," Holmes continued, his tone almost conversational despite the tension. "Terror works admirably, as demonstrated by Mrs. Harrington's case. But terror fades, doesn't it? It transforms into determination, resistance, emotions your process cannot properly contain." Montague's expression darkened. "You've seen her portrait change." "Indeed, she reaches out, not unlike what we witnessed with Miss Winters earlier. Your subjects are not passive elements in your artistic experiments, Montague. They retain awareness, identity, purpose. Then the stabilization formula requires adjustment." Montague clutched the painting more tightly. "Verlaine will perfect it. We are too close to abandon our work now." "Verlaine is in police custody," Holmes reminded him. "And your order is exposed." With sudden decision, Montague lunged toward a side passage I hadn't noticed. I moved to intercept him, but slipped on the damp stone floor. In that critical moment of hesitation, he gained the passage and slammed an iron gate between us, securing it with a heavy padlock. "You cannot stop the great work, Mr. Holmes," he called back triumphantly. "Even without Verlaine, I possess the knowledge to continue. And I have other paintings, other subjects awaiting completion. The police will find you wherever you run," I shouted. His laughter echoed as he retreated deeper into the passage. "Let them try. The esoteric arts have perfected concealment long before your modern police were conceived." Holmes examined the gate with his lens. "Picking this lock would take more time than we can afford. We must find another route." He consulted his mental map of our surroundings. "This passage likely emerges somewhere on the grounds. An escape route for emergencies." We retraced our steps to the laboratory, where Holmes quickly gathered several items. The catalyst vial, pages torn from the journal, and a small wooden box containing what appeared to be specialized brushes. Holmes, what do you intend? Later, Watson. First, we must return to Baker Street with all haste. Elizabeth Harrington's portrait may be our only remaining link to both women now. As we emerged from the tunnel into the main house, we found Lestrade supervising the removal of various items from the gallery. Verlaine sat despondently under guard, his hands cuffed before him. "Holmes, there you are!" Lestrade exclaimed. "What, in heaven's name, is going on? These people claim to be mere art enthusiasts, but we've found equipment and substances suggesting far more sinister activities." "You've stumbled upon a conspiracy of extraordinary nature, Lestrade," Holmes replied, "one involving multiple disappearances and scientific principles that defy conventional understanding. Montague escaped through an underground passage," I added, "with evidence crucial to the case." "I'll deploy men to search the grounds," Lestrade said. "Do so, but he's likely gone. Meanwhile, guard Verlaine with your life. He possesses knowledge vital to resolving this affair." As we departed with our collected evidence, I noticed Verlaine watching Holmes with an expression of dawning recognition, and, unless I was mistaken, fear. Chapter 8. The Reversal. Our return to Baker Street was conducted in tense silence. The portfolio containing Elizabeth Harrington's portrait balanced carefully between us. The storm had intensified, rattling the cab windows as though nature itself protested the violation of its laws we had witnessed. "You intend to attempt the reversal yourself," I ventured finally, watching Holmes study the torn journal pages by the uncertain light of the cab's lantern. "I see no alternative, Watson." His face was grave. "Mrs. Harrington's portrait continues to change. Each transformation suggests increasing distress, or perhaps a weakening of her prison. Either interpretation demands immediate action. But, Holmes, the risks are considerable, yes." He met my gaze directly. "I shall require your assistance, old friend. Your steady hand and medical knowledge may prove invaluable." Mrs. Hudson had retired for the night by the time we arrived, for which I was grateful. The fewer witnesses to our extraordinary undertaking, the better. Holmes quickly transformed our sitting room into an improvised laboratory, clearing the dining table and assembling the items collected from the Order's headquarters. The portrait, when unwrapped, confirmed Holmes's assessment. Elizabeth Harrington's position had altered further, both hands now pressed against the invisible barrier of the canvas, her expression one of desperate determination. Most disturbing was the faint translucency that had begun to affect her figure, as though she were fading from the painted world without successfully crossing into our own. "Time grows short," Holmes muttered, examining the portrait with his glass. "The integration appears unstable, precisely as I suspected." Could that instability prove fatal to her? I asked, dreading the answer. Possibly. The torn pages reference subject dissolution as a potential failure state. Holmes carefully arranged the specialized brushes. I believe their process creates a suspending medium between dimensions, neither fully in our reality nor entirely beyond it. When the suspension destabilizes... He left the grim conclusion unspoken. "What do you require of me?" I asked, rolling up my sleeves. "Prepare these compounds according to the formula." Holmes indicated measurements penciled in the margin of a journal page. I shall study the geometric aspects of the technique. For nearly an hour, we worked with fierce concentration. I mixed precise quantities of the catalyst with other substances from the wooden box, while Holmes used charcoal to trace complex patterns on sheets of paper, measuring angles with scientific precision. The mathematics suggests a resonance pattern, he explained, connecting lines between specific points. Verlaine applied the catalyst to key nodes on the painting, eyes, lips, hands, creating a geometric harmony that altered the fundamental properties of the medium. To reverse the process, we must disrupt that harmony while providing a pathway back to our reality. Holmes indicated the completed diagram. These points correspond to the physical frame of the portrait itself, not the painted image. The bare frame serves as both boundary and conduit. A clock somewhere struck midnight as Holmes finally straightened. I believe we are prepared, Watson. Are the compounds mixed? I indicated 3 small dishes, each containing a different solution. As precisely as possible, given the circumstances. Excellent. Now we must create absolute stillness and concentration. Holmes dimmed the lamps until only a single light illuminated the portrait. The journal emphasizes the importance of intent and focus. He positioned himself before the painting, taking up one of the specialized brushes. With steady precision, he dipped it into the first compound and applied it to the wooden frame at specific points corresponding to his diagram. Watson, when I give the word, you must apply the second solution to these points. He indicated positions on the opposite side of the frame. Follow the sequence precisely. As I moved into position, a curious sensation began to permeate the room. A subtle vibration that seemed to resonate not merely in the air, but within objects themselves. The portrait began to emit the same faint luminescence we had observed during Montague's demonstration. Now, Watson, I applied the solution as directed, my doctor's steadiness serving me well despite the extraordinary circumstances. As each point received the compound, the vibration intensified and the luminescence deepened, creating the same unsettling dimensional effect we had witnessed at Ravenswood Road. Holmes began to recite a sequence of numbers that I recognized from the journal, not an incantation but mathematical values, precisely timed. With each number, he applied the third compound to points where the canvas met the frame. The portrait transformed before our eyes. The painted scene receded impossibly, creating a tunnel-like effect extending beyond the frame's physical limitations. Elizabeth Harrington's figure seemed to drift forward within this space, her hands still outstretched toward us. She sees us, Holmes said quietly, never interrupting his measured application of the solution. Mrs. Harrington, Elizabeth, we are attempting to free you. You must continue to fight against the constraints. Whether she truly heard or merely continued her own desperate struggle, her painted form grew more distinct, pushing against the threshold that separated canvas from reality. When Holmes applied the final touch of the solution, a tremendous surge of energy pulsed through the room, extinguishing all lamps and throwing us backwards. In the sudden darkness, I heard a soft thud, followed by labored breathing. Strike a match. Watson! Holmes's voice came calmly from nearby. I fumbled in my pocket and managed to light the gas lamp. There, collapsed upon our carpet, lay a woman in the same dress Elizabeth Harrington had worn in the portrait. Her auburn hair fell across her face as she gulped air like a drowning swimmer finally reaching the surface. Holmes knelt beside her, offering his handkerchief. "Mrs. Harrington, you're safe now." She raised her head, revealing features identical to those in the portrait, though lined with exhaustion. "How?" she managed weakly. "How long?" 3 days, Holmes answered gently. "Though I suspect it felt considerably longer for you." Her gaze travelled to the portrait on the table, now showing only an empty chair against a studio backdrop, the painted figure entirely gone. "He must be stopped," she whispered hoarsely. "Montague, there are others, trapped as I was." "Others beyond Miss Winters?" Holmes asked sharply. Elizabeth Harrington nodded, her eyes haunted by memories no human should possess. "Many others in his private collection, and he intends to expand his technique far beyond its current limitations." "How so?" I asked, bringing her a glass of brandy. Her fingers trembled as she accepted it. "He spoke of landscapes that could absorb dozens at once. Public spaces, crowds." Holmes and I exchanged alarmed glances as the true horror of Montague's ambitions became clear. Chapter 9. The private collection dawn found us gathered in our sitting room, Elizabeth Harrington having been provided with Mrs. Hudson's spare bedroom for a few hours' rest. The poor woman was exhausted, but insisted on sharing everything she could recall of her ordeal before succumbing to sleep. Holmes had sent urgent messages to both Lestrade and Harrington, the latter arriving with the first light of day. The reunion between husband and wife was deeply moving, even to Holmes's typically detached sensibilities. After assuring himself of Elizabeth's well-being, Richard Harrington joined us in planning our next actions. Montague's private collection, Holmes mused, pacing before the fireplace. Mrs. Harrington mentioned it was housed in his Mayfair residence. Yes, in a specially constructed gallery beyond his study, Elizabeth confirmed, her voice steadier after rest, though her hands still trembled slightly. "He showed it to me once, before I understood its true nature." "You had no suspicion?" I asked gently. "None. He presented himself as a passionate collector with excellent taste. The unusual quality of the portraits, their extraordinary, lifelike appearance, seemed merely evidence of exceptional artistic talent." She shuddered. "How could I have imagined the truth?" "No reasonable person could," Harrington assured her, clasping her hand protectively. "What can you tell us about the collection?" Holmes inquired. "Numbers, subjects, anything that might prove useful." "At least a dozen portraits when I viewed it 2 weeks ago. Predominantly women, though several men as well. Various periods, some appeared quite old, suggesting this abomination has been practiced for generations." "The order certainly implied historical lineage," Holmes agreed. "Their techniques refined over time rather than newly discovered." "Elizabeth," Harrington interjected with obvious reluctance, "forgive me, but I must ask, what was it like within the painting?" A profound silence fell. Elizabeth's gaze turned inward, focusing on memories I could scarcely imagine. "Consciousness without form," she finally answered. "Identity without body. At first, pure terror. The sensation of dissolution was indescribable." Her voice faltered momentarily. "But terror gives way to determination when survival instinct asserts itself. I began to sense the boundaries of my prison and push against them. Somehow, I knew I wasn't entirely lost. That part of me remained, connected to reality. Holmes nodded. The unstable integration I suspected. The Order hasn't fully mastered the technique. Their subjects retain autonomous consciousness. Is that why you were able to free me? This imperfection in their method? Partially. The mathematical principles underpinning the process contain inherent contradictions, points of potential reversal. Holmes tapped the diagrams he'd constructed. Given sufficient understanding and the proper catalysts, what has been done can be undone. A knock at the door announced Inspector Lestrade, looking haggard after a night of activity at Ravenswood Road. We've secured the premises and arrested several Order members who attempted to return, he reported. Verlaine remains in custody, but refuses to speak without legal representation. And Montague? Holmes pressed. No sign yet. We've officers watching his Mayfair address, but the house appears unoccupied. He'll not return there directly, Holmes said. Yet his collection remains valuable, too valuable to abandon entirely. You believe he'll attempt to retrieve it? I suggested. Eventually, yes, but first he'll seek security elsewhere. A secondary location, perhaps? Holmes's eyes suddenly lit with realization. Of course. Watson, you recall Lady Carmichael mentioned that her husband withdrew from the Order after participating briefly? Yes, though she didn't elaborate on his reasons. What if Sir William discovered something that disturbed even him? Something beyond the Order's stated objectives? Holmes turned to Lestrade. Inspector, what do we know of the Carmichael estate? They maintain a country property in Surrey. I believe, financial difficulties notwithstanding, it remains in family hands. Isolated, familiar to Montague, and connected to the Order through past association. Holmes grabbed his coat. We must proceed there immediately. Holmes, I cautioned, shouldn't we first secure Montague's collection? If these portraits contain trapped individuals, as Mrs. Harrington suggests. A valid concern. Holmes considered briefly. Lestrade, can you assemble a discreet team to secure the Mayfair residence? The gallery lies beyond Montague's study, according to Mrs. Harrington. Under no circumstances should the paintings be damaged or removed before we can attempt the reversal process. I'll see to it personally, Lestrade assured him. Though I confess, Holmes, this case strains credibility. If I hadn't witnessed that laboratory myself. Maintain an open mind, Inspector. The boundaries of science extend far beyond conventional understanding. Holmes turned to the Harringtons. You should return home under police protection. Montague knows we've liberated Mrs. Harrington. He may seek retribution. As we prepared to depart, Elizabeth caught Holmes's arm. Mr. Holmes, there's something else, something I heard while trapped. Montague spoke of a grand exhibition planned for next week at the Royal Academy. He mentioned a commissioned landscape of Hyde Park during a public concert, a scene potentially containing hundreds of figures. A mass abduction through artistic means, Holmes said grimly. His ambition grows more monstrous. Thank you, Mrs. Harrington. This information may prove crucial. Outside, Holmes hailed a cab while I secured our revolvers and the materials necessary for additional reversals. The situation grows increasingly complex, Holmes observed as our cab pulled away. We face multiple imperatives: locate Montague, rescue those trapped in his collection, and prevent this grand exhibition from proceeding. Where do we begin? With Sir William Carmichael. If my suspicions are correct, he withdrew from the Order after discovering Montague's true ambitions, perhaps even attempted to thwart them. Holmes gazed thoughtfully out the window. The mathematical principles I observed suggest a correlation between the duration of imprisonment and the difficulty of reversal. Those trapped longest may be hardest to free. Then we race against more than Montague's plans, I realized soberly. We race against the strengthening bonds of their imprisonment. Precisely, Watson, and I fear some may already be beyond our reach. Chapter 10. Sir William's Secret. The Carmichael estate lay some 20 miles from London, a journey rendered more arduous by deteriorating weather. As our train rattled through the Surrey countryside, Holmes studied the torn journal pages with renewed intensity. "I've been contemplating the fundamental principle underlying the Order's technique," he remarked. "What they've achieved is not, as they believe, the extraction of essence from living subjects, but rather the creation of a permeable boundary between states of reality." "Like a door between worlds," I suggested. "More a dissolution of the barrier that separates representation from existence." Holmes sketched a series of intersecting lines on his notepad. The mathematics suggests a point of convergence, a moment when the symbolic becomes literal through precise manipulation of both medium and perception. The Carmichael property proved to be a modest manor house surrounded by neglected grounds. Further, evidence of the family's financial decline. Lady Carmichael received us in the same drawing room where we had conversed in London, transported wholesale to the country residence, though the furnishings appeared even shabbier in daylight. "Sir William is indisposed," she informed us with evident discomfort. "His health has been fragile since withdrawing from London society." "It is imperative we speak with him," Holmes insisted. "Lives hang in the balance, Lady Carmichael, including, potentially, your own." Her composure faltered. "Mine? Surely Alastair wouldn't—" "Montague's ambitions have expanded considerably beyond what you witnessed," Holmes said gravely. "We have reason to believe he plans a mass application of the Order's techniques during a public exhibition." Lady Carmichael paled visibly. "I never imagined. William warned me, but I thought his fears exaggerated." "What precisely did Sir William warn you about?" I asked. "That Alastair's research had crossed into dangerous territory, that what began as exploration of artistic transcendence had corrupted into something monstrous." She wrung her hands. "William destroyed his own portrait after leaving the Order. He claimed it contained fragments of himself he couldn't bear to leave vulnerable." Holmes leaned forward. "Lady Carmichael, we must speak with your husband immediately." She hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Follow me, but please, his condition is delicate. The strain of his experiences has affected his mind." She led us upstairs to a darkened bedroom, where heavy curtains blocked the daylight. The air held the unmistakable scent of illness. Medicinal compounds mingled with the staleness of prolonged confinement. Sir William Carmichael reclined in a large bed, his once robust frame now wasted, skin stretched thinly over prominent bones. His eyes, however, remained alert and wary as we entered. "Visitors, William," Lady Carmichael announced gently. Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. They're investigating Alastair's activities." "Too late," Sir William rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "Far too late." Holmes approached the bedside. "Sir William, we've witnessed the Order's demonstration. We've even succeeded in reversing the process for one victim. But Montague escaped with critical materials." Sir William's eyes widened with surprise. "Reversed? Impossible. The integration is designed to be permanent." "Not entirely," Holmes replied. "The mathematical framework contains inherent contradictions, points of vulnerability." "You understand the mathematics?" Genuine astonishment coloured the baronet's feeble voice. "Sufficiently to engineer a reversal, yes. But Montague plans something far more ambitious, a landscape containing hundreds of potential victims." Sir William struggled to sit upright, aided by his wife. "The Hyde Park Commission. I hoped he had abandoned it after my intervention." "What intervention?" Holmes pressed. "I destroyed his original studies, mathematical calculations for large-scale integration. Without them, I thought the project impossible." His breathing grew laboured with exertion. "The calculations required for multiple subjects are exponentially more complex than for individuals. Yet he appears to have reconstructed them," I observed. "Verlaine," Sir William muttered. "The artist possesses extraordinary mathematical intuition, a savant's gift disguised behind artistic temperament. Together, they might have recreated what I destroyed." Holmes produced his notebook. "These symbols appeared in the journal fragments we recovered. Do they represent the mathematical framework you mentioned?" Sir William examined the page and nodded weakly. "Partial components, yes, but incomplete, dangerously so. Attempted application with incomplete formulas would create unstable integration." "Resulting in what precisely?" I asked. "Dissolution of the subject, neither fully extracted nor properly maintained. A fate worse than death." His voice dropped further, forcing us to lean closer. "There's more. My private research suggests the process affects the artist as well. With each extraction, something transfers. The artist absorbs fragments of the subject's consciousness." Explaining Verlaine's increasingly erratic behaviour, Holmes mused. "And perhaps Montague's expanding ambitions. Personality traits absorbed from his victims. Where would Montague go to complete his preparations?" I asked. "With the Order exposed and his Mayfair residence under observation." Sir William's eyes drifted toward the window. "The Academy itself. As a patron and commissioned artist, he has access to private studios in the building, spaces specially constructed for large-scale works." Holmes straightened immediately. "Then we have no time to lose. The exhibition opens when?" 3 days hence," Lady Carmichael supplied. "The spring showcase is always well attended." "Is there anything else we should know?" Holmes asked Sir William. "Any weakness in Montague's methods we might exploit?" "The artist's focus is essential," Sir William whispered, his strength clearly fading. "Disrupt the geometric harmony. Create discordance in the mathematical sequence. The integration fails." As we prepared to depart, Sir William grasped Holmes's sleeve with surprising strength. "Beware, Mr. Holmes. Montague has absorbed aspects of dozens of victims. He is not entirely himself anymore. Perhaps not entirely human in his thinking." Outside, as we hurried toward the waiting carriage, I voiced the concern that had been growing throughout our interview. Holmes, if Sir William is correct about the transfer effect, then Montague becomes more dangerous with each extraction. Indeed, Watson, and with a gallery of victims already absorbed, we face an adversary with capabilities and motivations beyond normal human parameters. Holmes's expression was grave. We must telegraph Lestrade immediately. The Royal Academy must be secured before Montague can complete his preparations. And the victims already trapped in his collection? We shall attempt their rescue concurrently, though I fear, based on Sir William's assessment, that some may be beyond our help. Chapter 11. The Royal Academy A telegram awaited us at the station. Lestrade reporting that Montague's Mayfair residence had indeed been secured, but the man himself remained elusive. More concerning was his postscript. Private gallery discovered. 12 portraits as described. Officers report strange sounds emanating from frames, awaiting your instructions before proceeding. 12 souls in torment, Holmes murmured, pocketing the message. We shall attend to them once Montague is apprehended. The Royal Academy of Arts stood magnificent against the clearing evening sky as our cab deposited us before its grand entrance. The building appeared peaceful, with only a few staff members visible through the windows, preparing for the upcoming exhibition. How do you propose we proceed? I asked, noting the uniformed guard stationed at the entrance. We have no official standing here. Holmes adjusted his collar. Fortunately, Watson, the name of Sherlock Holmes occasionally opens doors that might otherwise remain closed. Indeed, upon presenting his card to the guard and mentioning an urgent matter regarding one of the exhibition's premier works, we were promptly directed to the administrative offices. There, a harried-looking secretary informed us that several artists were working late in the private studios, Montague among them. He arrived early this morning, she explained, most insistent about completing his landscape before the opening. The Academy generally accommodates our more prestigious contributors. And which studio might we find him in? Holmes inquired casually. The North Gallery Annex. It's been adapted for larger works. She frowned slightly. Though visitors aren't typically permitted in the working studios, we shan't disturb his creative process, Holmes assured her smoothly. Merely a brief consultation on a matter of provenance. As we made our way through the Academy's labyrinthine corridors, Holmes whispered, "Be prepared for anything, Watson. If Montague has indeed absorbed aspects of his victim's consciousness, his behavior may be unpredictable." The North Gallery Annex proved to be a vast space with soaring ceilings and specialized lighting. Large curtains had been arranged to partition individual work areas, creating private studios within the larger hall. Directed by a helpful attendant, we located Montague's designated space at the far end. Holmes motioned for silence as we approached. Through a small gap in the curtains, we observed Montague working on an enormous canvas, easily 12 feet wide, depicting a sunlit scene of Hyde Park during a concert. The painting was nearly complete, with dozens of meticulously rendered figures populating the foreground and hundreds more suggested in the background crowds. Unlike typical artistic process, however, Montague was applying not paint, but a clear substance to specific points on the canvas, while consulting complex mathematical notations arranged on an adjacent easel. The familiar silver instruments we had observed at the Order's demonstration lay ready on a nearby table. The catalyst application, Holmes whispered. "He prepares the painting for mass extraction. Should we not apprehend him immediately?" I urged. "Not yet. Observe the canvas carefully, Watson. The integration points are incomplete. Interrupting now might trigger an unstable reaction." We watched as Montague continued his methodical work, occasionally stepping back to consult his calculations. His movements were precise, yet somehow disjointed, as though multiple competing impulses guided his actions. More disturbing still was his habit of murmuring to himself in distinctly different tones, sometimes a feminine whisper, sometimes a gruff masculine growl, as though conducting a conversation among disparate personalities. Sir William was correct. Holmes breathed. The absorption has fragmented his identity. After several minutes of observation, Holmes withdrew a folded paper from his pocket, the diagram he had constructed for Elizabeth Harrington's liberation. With a pencil, he swiftly modified several key junctures, muttering calculations under his breath. "Watson," he said finally, "we must disrupt his mathematical sequence precisely at the moment of activation. Too soon, and he'll simply correct his work. Too late, and the integration process begins, endangering anyone viewing the painting. My dear, do we accomplish this? The connective points must be altered, not erased, but shifted to create dissonance rather than harmony." Holmes indicated specific locations on his diagram. "We require a distraction to draw him away from the canvas." Momentarily, before we could formulate a plan, the decision was made for us. The curtain behind Montague parted to admit a uniformed academy guard. "Mr. Montague, forgive the interruption, but there's an Inspector Lestrade at the main entrance, asking rather insistently about you." Montague stiffened. "Lestrade? Tell him I'm unavailable. This work cannot be interrupted at this critical stage." "He seems most determined, sir. Mentioned something about a warrant." Montague's expression contorted with evident internal conflict. Finally, he placed his instruments carefully on the table. "Very well. I shall speak with him briefly. Allow no one to enter this space during my absence." As Montague departed with the guard, Holmes sprang into action. "Quickly, Watson! We have minutes at most." We slipped behind the curtain, approaching the massive canvas. Up close, the painting's execution was even more impressive. The figures rendered with such lifelike precision that they seemed almost to breathe upon the canvas. Holmes immediately set to work, altering the catalyst application at specific points, according to his modified diagram. I stationed myself near the curtain, revolver ready, watching for Montague's return. "These calculations are extraordinarily complex," Holmes muttered as he worked. "The integration matrix expands exponentially with each additional subject. Montague's mathematical genius is undeniable, however twisted his application. How long will your alterations require?" "Nearly finished. The key is subtle disruption, not obvious sabotage. The process must begin, but collapse at its critical juncture." A commotion echoed from the entrance hall. Lestrade's voice raised in official protest, followed by Montague's increasingly agitated response. "Our time grows short," I warned. Holmes stepped back from the canvas, surveying his work with critical eye. "It's done. Now we must—" The curtain whipped aside, revealing Montague. His face contorted with rage when he saw us, but the expression shifted microseconds later to one of calculating calm. The transitions between emotional states unnervingly fluid, as though multiple personalities competed for control. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice unnaturally modulated, "you prove persistently troublesome." Chapter 12. The Final Canvas. "Step away from the painting, Mr. Holmes." Montague's hand emerged from his coat pocket, holding a small revolver. "Your interference has become tiresome." "I merely admired your technique," Holmes replied calmly, subtly, positioning himself between Montague and the altered points on the canvas. "The mathematical precision is remarkable, particularly for large-scale integration." A flicker of pride crossed Montague's face, one of the many fragmentary emotions that seemed to cycle through his features with unnerving rapidity. "You understand it, then?" His voice shifted to a higher, almost feminine register. "Few minds can grasp the beauty of the equations." Then, dropping to a harsher tone, "which makes your sabotage all the more offensive." Holmes spread his hands in a placating gesture. "Not sabotage, refinement. Your calculations contained minor imperfections that would have caused instability in the integration matrix." Doubt crept into Montague's expression. "Impossible. I verified each sequence." "With a fragmented consciousness, how reliable is your verification process when your own identity has been compromised by multiple absorptions?" Holmes took a careful step sideways, drawing Montague's attention. Sir William Carmichael explained the transference effect. "How many personalities now compete for dominance in your mind, Montague?" "They don't compete," he snapped. "They contribute. Each extraction enriches my understanding." A tremor passed through his body. "Though some resist more persistently than others." During this exchange, I had been inching towards the table of instruments, my movement masked by Holmes's deliberately expansive gestures. "And what of those trapped in your private collection?" Holmes pressed. 12 souls in perpetual torment, conscious but immobile, aware but unable to act. A temporary condition." Montague gestured toward the Hyde Park landscape with his free hand. "This work represents the next evolution. The integration will be perfect. Consciousness preserved eternally in an ideal moment. Preserved for what purpose?" Holmes challenged. "To satisfy your aesthetic sensibilities, or to further fragment your own identity through mass absorption?" Confusion crossed Montague's face, followed by a brief but visible internal struggle, his features shifting rapidly between expressions as though different personalities sought momentary control. "The purpose transcends your limited understanding," he finally replied, his voice now a disturbing amalgamation of multiple tones speaking in near unison. "Art and artist become one, the ultimate creative union." "At the cost of hundreds of innocent lives," Holmes replied coldly. "Not lives lost, lives transformed." Montague's agitation increased visibly. "You've disrupted my preparations long. Enough. I must complete the activation sequence before the exhibition opening." He raised his revolver more firmly. "Move away from the canvas, Mr. Holmes." Holmes complied, stepping deliberately to position Montague with his back to me. "The activation requires the silver instruments, does it not? The baton-like conductor's wand that Verlaine wielded during your demonstration?" "Among other components, yes." Montague's eyes narrowed. "Why do you ask?" "Scientific curiosity merely. The role of conductive metals in the process fascinates me. Montague turned slightly toward the table where the instruments lay, and in that moment of distraction, I seized one of the heavier silver implements and brought it down hard against his wrist. The revolver clattered to the floor as Holmes lunged forward, grappling Montague away from both the weapon and the canvas. Despite his scholarly appearance, Montague fought with the strength and unpredictability of a man possessed, which, in a sense, he was. One moment his movements were calculated and precise, the next wild and frenzied. It required both Holmes's strategic skill and my own physical weight to finally subdue him. "The activation sequence," Holmes gasped as we secured Montague with cords cut from the curtain fixtures. "He must have initiated it before the guard summoned him. Watson, the canvas!" Indeed, the massive painting had begun to emit the now familiar luminescence, though with a distinctive irregularity, pulsing rather than steady, concentrating around certain figures before dispersing chaotically across the surface. "Your interference changes nothing," Montague laughed, a horrifying sound containing multiple voices in discordant harmony. "The process has begun. Soon hundreds will join my collection, their essence feeding my transcendence." Holmes rushed to the canvas, examining the spreading luminescence with critical eye. The disrupted sequence is creating precisely the instability we intended. The integration matrix cannot stabilize across multiple points simultaneously. The luminescence intensified, accompanied by an unsettling harmonic vibration that seemed to emanate not merely from the canvas, but from the very air surrounding it. The painted scene began to recede dimensionally, as we had witnessed before. But instead of a smooth transition, the effect shattered into fragmented pockets of depth that collapsed almost immediately. "It's failing!" Montague cried in dismay, struggling against his bonds. "You've ruined everything." "On the contrary," Holmes replied, "I've prevented an atrocity." The instability increased rapidly. Painted figures briefly showed signs of animation before freezing again in different positions. The harmonic vibration grew painful to our ears. "Holmes, is this safe?" I asked urgently. Could the collapse release those already trapped? Theoretically possible, though not without additional catalysts. Holmes retreated from the increasingly volatile canvas. More likely, the painting will simply neutralize, reverting to ordinary pigment and canvas. A final surge of energy pulsed through the room, knocking us backward. The luminescence flared blindingly bright before extinguishing completely. When our vision cleared, the Hyde Park landscape remained, but now merely a painting, extraordinary in its technical execution, but devoid of the otherworldly dimension it had briefly manifested. Montague slumped in his bonds, his expression cycling through grief, rage, and finally a strange, vacant calm. "It's over," Holmes said quietly. "And now, Watson, we must attend to those still imprisoned in Montague's collection. With the formulas we've gathered and what we've learned from this confrontation, I believe we can free at least some of them." As Lestrade and his men burst through the curtains, summoned by the commotion, I glanced at the now ordinary landscape on its massive canvas. How close we had come to witnessing hundreds of souls vanishing inside a frame, trapped in a madman's twisted vision of artistic immortality. "There will be aspects of this case that defy official explanation," Holmes murmured as we watched Montague being led away. The world remains unprepared to acknowledge such boundaries between art and reality. Yet you unravelled it through science and reason, I observed. Holmes smiled faintly. The most fantastical phenomena, Watson, often yield to systematic analysis. In this case, the mathematics provided both the means of imprisonment and the key to liberation. A peculiar sort of justice, I reflected, that Montague's own equations, properly understood, became his undoing. Indeed. And speaking of justice, we have 12 more souls awaiting their own liberation. Our work is far from complete.